Hey friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
We have a few questions that we're going to answer here that have been asked by various viewers and people that we've met on the street. Deb said that she had some newspaper that was found in a renovation that was done on her place, I think in Minnesota.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of such a thing?
The newspaper in Minnesota?
No. Newspaper in the wall for insulation.
Oh, yeah. That's super common in the old days.
Yeah.
And it's not dramatically different than blown-in cellulose.
Exactly. There's a lot of other things that are also used for insulation. Sawdust, for example. Horsehair wasn't used so much for insulation, but it was used as part of the plastering for the inside of a house.
Yeah.
That's especially true in the very early 1900s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been in a house before that had horsehair plaster in the kitchen.
Do we get green Mojave rattlesnakes? The answer is yes. We don't have very many rattlesnakes on our property. I think we've seen a handful in 17 years.
Right. They tend to like areas that have a lot of rocks and stuff like that, you know, like cliff sort of things and buttes and whatnot full of rocks. And we don't have that on our property.
Now, I know of two green Mojaves. The name green Mojave isn't really right. It's just another rattlesnake.
Right.
Green Mojave is kind of the name that's been attached to them. They have the reputation of being more aggressive and being more venomous, and I read conflicting reports on that, but I can tell you that the people who have died in our general vicinity from snake bites have mostly been older people who have been bitten by green Mojaves.
Right, right. You know, now they may have died from a regular rattlesnake bite too. There's no way to guess, because obviously if you already have existing conditions, including bad circulatory systems or anything else like that, anything that's going to affect your circulation is going to make it worse.
Your friend Pam from southern Arizona said that in response to one of our videos about the greenhouse that she could probably start some plants in pots in the house that's under construction. What do you think about that?
Sure, I don't see why not. I mean, they're already finding it very temperate in comparison to what the outside weather's doing. And as long as it's not getting below 40 at night, you can certainly do it, especially if you want to try using some sort of heat mat or something like that, if you have electricity you can spare. If you can't spare it, doing a complete cover where you have like one of the little grow sets where you have a little hood on it and stuff like that, will still probably keep it warm enough to do just fine. Just make sure it stays watered, and you should be able to grow lots of different things there.
You know, we've advocated growing what you can where you can, and that means a 5-gallon bucket, a 10-gallon bucket, anything.
Right.
Fill it up with some potting soil or good quality compost and plant in it.
Right, right. Yeah, no, you know, there have been years when we have had our stuff really together and we have done heavy pushes to do extensive planting programs both in the greenhouse and in the yard. There have been other years when we just decided we couldn't deal with it. You know, that we just didn't have enough mental and physical energy to do that along with everything else that we needed to do. We have cut back because one of the things, and we're seeing this with other homesteader type people too, is that they'll go crazy because they love this particular pepper, say, and they want to make all this pepper sauce and there's this and that, and they do, and then they wind up with, like, you know, 100 jars of it, and they don't need to grow that pepper for another 3 years
or more.
And there's a couple of people that just recently I've heard them say, well, I finally actually used up that stuff, so this year we are going to grow it again, but we're not going to try and produce, you know, like a decade's worth of, of this particular item. We're just going to produce a little bit plus more.
Yeah.
And that's what we've switched to.
You know, we don't grow produce for other people to purchase and eat. We
Nope.
eat it ourselves. If we have a lot of surplus, those people we know who actually know how to cook or use fresh vegetables will
Right.
share.
Right.
But an awful lot of people today really don't know how to prepare fresh vegetables. So it's a waste to give it to them. In fact, I know that one of our local food banks just does not give out fresh produce because it ends up being thrown on the side of the road.
Yeah, yeah. A number of years ago, when we did have a much larger garden, I knew somebody who worked at the local food bank. And there were a couple times when I took stuff down there, and she said, I'm like, look, I've got like 30 pounds extra of this stuff. Would you take it? And she said, would you mind if we kept it for Sunday dinner? Because at the church, the food bank is at the church, and on Sunday they do church service, and then they feed everybody that's there. And I said, no, I just don't want it to go to waste. She said the reason she asked that question was because they've found in the past that if they handed it out, people would throw it out the window of their car as they were driving away because they didn't like vegetables and they
Yeah.
didn't know how to cook vegetables. So, but they knew that they knew how to cook vegetables. So on Sunday, that would become part of the church meal. And I'm like, fine. All I wanted is to not have it spoil.
Yeah, we've done that for years when
Yeah.
we had surplus. We still have plenty of tomato sauce in the pantry.
Right, right.
So we're not going to grow as many tomatoes as we have in the past.
No.
Really what we're growing is mostly for fresh eating,
Right.
and we have some paste tomatoes that will probably be using some other purposes.
Right. Well, some of the paste tomatoes actually are good fresh eating too. Some paste tomatoes have a very thick, tough skin. So they're just not particularly tasty for, say, use in salads and stuff, unless you want to peel them. And I try not to create more work for myself whenever I can avoid it. But,
Or for me.
yeah, right, for whoever's making the salads. So, but we will be growing some this year. We developed a recipe that we really liked for tomato soup using our homegrown stuff. And we still have one batch of tomato sauce that we made last year that works particularly well in tomato soup. It's just, each time you do it, depending on the varieties of tomatoes and how long you cook it and everything else, you get a slightly different profile of flavor. So we just decided we'll keep that for that. I still have plenty of old tomato sauce. I have been using it up for pizzas on Friday nights.
We don't eat a lot of tomato sauce
No.
in our food, mostly because we don't do that.
No.
We tend to cook other kinds of food that don't require tomato sauce.
Right. And historically, my perception of tomato sauce is a lot of times, and I know this is a sort of a negative statement, a lot of times people use it to cover up stuff. You're whipping something together quick, you got to give it some flavor, throw in some tomato sauce.
Yeah. Although I can't eat it anymore, I love a good lasagna that has a lot of meat and a lot of tomato product in it. We don't do that very often. It's just the two of us, so trying to cook lasagna for two, even
Yeah.
if you're going to eat it for 3 days,
Well,
is an awful lot of work.
even when we had a herd of children marching through our house on a regular basis when our kids were in high school and stuff like that, I would make a big tray of it, and then I'd freeze it in individual servings. And that means if a kid came home at some odd hour and was hungry, you could say, hey, there's lasagna in the freezer, nuke it for this much time, turn it, nuke it again, and you'll have a good meal. So it was kind of like fast food, even back then.
We had 2 categories of comments that were prompted first by the show that I did taking you into town through the muddy road, and that was not the worst
Oh,
of
no.
that road
Sorta.
ever. When we first came out here, we were brought out by a real estate agent in a 4-wheel drive Jeep that it is not an exaggeration to say when we went through some of the mud puddles, water came in underneath the door
Right.
and flooded the mats.
Right.
So it was a lot wetter then. But one of the questions was, does the mud here stain clothes? Like when we were in South Carolina in school, because I had a shirt that we were out stomping in mud puddles like one does when in their early 20s.
Yes, yes.
And it was stained when we finally got rid of it many years later.
Yeah, that has a high iron content in it. In general, I would say no, the mud here does not stain particularly. You can stain with it sometimes, but generally speaking, if you use a little, elbow grease, soak it in there, some enzyme or something like that, you can clean it up pretty well. We, on the other hand, don't wear much in the way of white socks, because why would I do that? Because even if there's no mud, if it's just dust, you'll get a ring around the top of your shoe on your socks. And over time, that can just get dingy, and it just makes it look crummy. So we almost always wear colored socks of some sorts. It's just an easier thing. Now, some people would say, well, just get white ones and then you can bleach them. Yeah, but the modern socks don't hold up well to bleach. Even if you're using the oxy bleaches and stuff, you'll eventually kill them that way. So, I'll just wear black socks. It's fine.
Yeah, the next question relates very much to some comments that Irene did in the show about plastic bags not being necessarily good for construction. There's a bunch of different kinds of plastic. And the one thing they all have in common, and I mean all of them, they haven't been around that long, so the people who say, well, it's going to last 5,000 years, they don't have any real basis to say that. The experimental evidence for all the plastics, or at least most of the plastics, is that they degrade over time. One of the biggest ways of having it degrade is either thermally, that is, you heat it up above 180 degrees Fahrenheit, or you expose it to ultraviolet. Now, both of those processes cause defects in the chains that make up that plastic. And what that does then is that starts making the various pieces that go together unravel. And that makes the plastic weak. Mm-hmm. There's two basic kinds of plastic that are commonly used in bags. One's polyethylene, and the other's polypropylene. Polypropylene does last longer, it's tougher. The question then is, what qualities of the bag do you use when you're constructing? And one of the things is, if you use the right kind of fill material, it's adobe.
Right.
And we've been around adobe buildings a lot.
Oh yeah, there were a ton of adobe buildings in New Mexico. We knew several people who lived in adobe houses, and we actually tried to buy a farm at one point that had an adobe house. That is honest to gosh adobe.
It's a mixture of sand and clay and straw.
Yeah, yeah. That's really different from what I've seen in Arizona.